The hall was silent, yet charged. Cameras blinked. Men in tailored suits leaned back with quiet certainty. Obama's calm smile, Macron's confident smirk. They expected another polite speech, predictable words, rehearsed lines, nothing dangerous. But when Traoré stepped to the podium, everything shifted. His footsteps echoed like approaching thunder. He didn't lower his gaze. He didn't play the script. His first words cut through the room like a blade. Sharp, fearless, unfiltered. Obama's smile faded. Macron's fingers twitched. And across the world, millions felt it. History wasn't being observed here. It was being rewritten. Live. The event was meant to be ordinary. A conference, well lit. Carefully organized, scripted down to the second. Rows of flags waved gently at the back of the stage. Global leaders sat shoulder to shoulder, their polished shoes gleaming under the lights, their body language radiating confidence. Every detail was choreographed, every seat prearranged, every camera lens angled for perfection. This was the West's theater, the stage where Africa was supposed to play a supporting role. Leaders from across the Atlantic expected speeches, filled with gratitude, polite recognition, and measured words that reinforced the old order. For decades, that had been the rhythm. Africa speaks, the West nods, the world moves on. But this time, something felt different. The buzz of the crowd was restless. Journalists in the back whispered to each other as the screens came alive. Translators slipped on their headsets, ready to dull the edges of whatever was said. And in the front row, Obama leaned slightly forward, his hands folded neatly, his expression calm but sharp. Macron crossed one leg over the other, adjusting the cuff of his suit with casual arrogance. To them, it was routine, a stage they thought they owned. Then the doors shifted open. Traoré entered with unshaken steps. Not hurried, not hesitant. Soldiers at his side, but not to protect him, to remind the audience who he represented. His eyes scanned the hall, not nervously, but deliberately, as if weighing each face, calculating each reaction before it even happened. He wasn't there as a guest. He was there as a storm. Reporters raised their cameras. The clicks echoed loudly in the silence. For a brief second, you could feel anticipation tighten the air like a rope. Those who knew him understood. This man did not play by old rules. This was the soldier-turned-leader who had already flipped tables in his own country, promising sovereignty and dignity. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What would he dare say, here in front of them, live? An aide gestured toward the podium. Traoré nodded once, placed his notes not in front of him but aside, and looked directly at the audience. That small gesture, ignoring the paper, was enough to make seasoned diplomats raise their brows. Speeches of this scale are never spoken without carefully written scripts. To discard one was to declare war against stagecraft itself. The hall shifted in mood. What was supposed to feel like a ceremony now felt like a confrontation. Obama's calm began to harden. Macron's smirk flickered. And the journalists at the back leaned in, ready to record history unfolding. Because what none of them realized in that moment was simple. This wasn't just a speech. This was about to become a reckoning. The microphone crackled for a heartbeat, and then silence gripped the room. Traoré's voice broke it clean. Slow, measured, commanding. Brothers and sisters, today, I will not read a script written for me. A wave of murmurs rippled across the hall. You could almost feel the diplomats shifting in their chairs. Interpreters blinked nervously before translating the words, their unease bleeding into their voices. The usual comfort of familiar phrases was suddenly ripped away. Obama's eyes narrowed. Macron tilted forward, lips pressed into a firm line. They both understood the subtle weight behind those words. This was not just a speech. It was an unscripted declaration, and unscripted declarations are dangerous. Traoré's cadence grew, sharper. For too long, others have told our story. They crafted it with their pens, their cameras, their policies. They said we are poor. They said we are weak. They said our future depends on them. But brothers and sisters, today I say it, loud and clear, our destiny will no longer be dictated. His voice thundered through the hall, hitting with more force than any bullet fired in war. Cameras zoomed in, journalists scribbled furiously. The headlines were already being written before the speech had even finished. One leaned toward the other and whispered, "Did he just challenge them? On live broadcast?" Rows of African delegates in the back straightened in their seats. Some clenched fists under the table, resisting the urge to applaud. Others stared wide-eyed, realizing they were witnessing not just a speech, but rebellion, framed in words. Macron's smirk was gone now, his jaw tightened visibly. Obama shifted slightly but maintained composure, his stare locked on the young African leader who dared to flip the stage upside down. Traoré was relentless. His words crackled with an electricity that the entire hall could feel. "You speak of democracy," he continued, this time looking directly at Macron. "Yet you deny it when it blooms where you cannot control it. You speak of freedom," he glanced toward Obama. "Yet you silence those who demand it for themselves. You have resources, technology, and power, but you lack what we hold in our bones, resilience. You have underestimated Africa, and for that, history will not forgive you." The crowd gasped. Yes, he had said it directly, on camera, to their faces. No veil of politeness, no diplomatic cushioning. It was the kind of honesty that felt like violence to those unaccustomed to hearing it outside closed-door meetings. The organizers near the backstage fumbled, whispering to one another. Should they cut the mics? Should they intervene? But every second of this was already streaming worldwide. To stop it now would only magnify its power. Reporters' phones buzzed with frantic calls from editors, capture every line, every reaction, every breath. Within minutes, hashtags erupted across social media. Traoré's speech, Unfiltered Africa, shook the West. Traoré leaned closer into the microphone, his tone grim yet passionate. Africa is not your pawn. Africa is not your colony. Africa is not your charity case, your playground, or your silent partner. Africa belongs to Africans, and we will not bow again. The sentence hit like a thunderclap. A standing shockwave rolled through the hall. Delegates stirred, whispers now rising like wildfire. The live captions on news outlets struggled to keep up with each burning word. Obama exhaled softly, his face calm but his fingers laced together tightly, hiding tension. Macron shifted uncomfortably, his foot tapping lightly against the floor, betraying his unease. They had come expecting predictable notes. Instead, they were watching the birth of a defiant anthem, one impossible to control, and Traoré wasn't finished. He raised a sheet of paper high, then dropped it slowly on the podium. Cameras zoomed in. It was blank. "This is what they wanted me to say," he declared. "Empty words, polite echoes, a hollow chorus. But I tore their script apart. I will not read in silence." The crowd broke into scattered applause, restrained at first, as if unsure whether it was allowed. Then louder, louder, until the walls shook. African leaders rose to their feet in quiet solidarity. Even some foreign journalists clapped. Unable to resist the magnetic force of defiance, the organizers were panicking now. Technicians whispered about cutting feed, while security exchanged uneasy glances. Too late. The speech was trending in real time, flooding Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube with subtitles and translated snippets. The world was already watching, and nothing could unwatch it. Macron finally broke composure, whispering sharply to an aide. Cameras caught it, his irritation immortalized in pixels. Obama remained composed, but the way his eyes stayed fixed upon Traoré told its own story. This man could not be ignored. Traoré lowered his voice now, forcing the hall to lean in closer. For generations, you convinced us that we are less. You wrote books. You made films. You printed images of a starving Africa in order to prove your point. You sold the image of misery, but never of power. But today, he paused long enough for silence to swallow his words whole. Today, Africa tears the mask away. Today, the world sees a continent unchained. That pause, that thunder, that declaration. It was cinematic in every sense. The applause was deafening. Even those too afraid to stand clapped from their seats. The hall was no longer in the grip of an event. It was in the grip of a movement. And still, behind those polite diplomatic faces, something darker brewed. For every heartbeat of cheers inside the hall, there were clenched jaws and unsettled hearts in the corridors of power. Obama and Macron exchanged glances, quiet, knowing. This was not just a speech. This was a warning. And warnings demand a response. The room had already shifted. The air was different. Cheers and whispers had cracked through the carefully engineered silence of diplomacy. But what happened next? Nobody, certainly not Obama, certainly not Macron, had expected. Traoré didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't raise his hands for applause. He allowed the clapping to rise, then fade. And when he spoke again, his voice was lower, steadier. Not the voice of a rebel. The voice of a judge. For decades, he said, you've stood on podiums like this one and told Africa what to do. You told us how to run our countries, how to behave if we wanted aid, how to kneel if we wanted mercy. But today, we are not here to beg. The words hit like steel. Obama's brow furrowed, almost imperceptibly. Macron adjusted his tie again, his throat tight, the camera catching every subtle twitch. Traoré raised his hand slowly and pointed, not at the audience, not at the hall, but directly at the flags behind him. Dozens of banners, French, American, EU, UN, symbols of global order. Our people see your colors, he continued, each word deliberate, deliberate, deliberate. But they do not see freedom in them. They see centuries of extraction. They see soldiers who came not to protect but to control. They see contracts written in a way that robs us blind in broad daylight. The cameras whipped around. News broadcasters shifted their tone. Something historic is happening. Let me ask you, he pressed, leaning forward over the podium now. Would you ever allow your children to walk barefoot while strangers took gold, oil, uranium, cocoa, cobalt from your soil to light up their homes? Would you let your sons die in endless wars while others profited? Tell me, Barack. Tell me, Emmanuel. Tell me, leaders of the West. You would not. His voice spiked like thunder, reverberating off the walls. A hush fell over the hall. For a moment, even the interpreters faltered, their voices cracking as they translated. But Traoré wasn't finished. His eyes narrowed. Yet you expected us to accept that fate. And we did. For too long we did. Until today. The audience gasped. The camera zoomed to Obama, ever controlled, still calm but biting the inside of his lip. Macron. He couldn't hide it. Sweat rang faintly at his temple and his jaw locked like a clenched vice. Traoré struck again. You sit on your stages and preach justice, yet when Africa asks for it, you laugh. When Africa stands up, you sanction. When Africa protects itself, you call it terrorism. But hear me now in front of the world. Your fear proves our power. Applause tore through the hall. Some leaders jumped to their feet, clapping wildly. The applause wasn't just for Traoré's words, it was for the chains breaking in real time before their eyes. The cameras kept feeding. Across the world, millions watched transfixed. Headlines formed live. Traoré names the West, shakes global stage. Social feeds exploded with clips. Young Africans shared it like gospel. Opposition voices raged online, but they could not deny the force of what they were seeing. The microphone caught his breath, steady, controlled, and then his final volley. Africa will not kneel. Not to Paris, not to Washington, never again. Our children will grow on roads built by us, in schools we created, with power fueled from our soil. You said we must wait for an opportunity. I stand here to tell you, opportunity is ours, already alive. The reaction ripped through the hall, like lightning. Unable to sit any longer, a section of African delegates rose in full standing ovation. The crowd erupted. The roar of applause danced against the cold silence of those who could not clap. The division was visible, raw, exposed for the world to see. The camera cut quickly again. Obama sat unmoving, his expression stiff, mindful of every lens. Macron whispered sharply to an aide, his gestures impatient, irritated. Moments later, a broadcaster whispered on air, They weren't ready for this." And that, right there, was the truth. Because what had begun as just a scheduled speech had turned into something else, something far more dangerous for the existing order. It wasn't just the crowd that had been shaken. It wasn't just Obama or Macron who hadn't expected this. It was the very balance of the narrative. For the first time, Africa wasn't seated at the back of the hall. It wasn't politely taking notes while others dictated the terms. No. On that day, with words bold and unchained, a soldier in uniform from landlocked Burkina Faso stood in front of the entire planet and reminded them, Africa is not silent anymore. The cheers thundered, shaking walls, shattering decorum. The climax had arrived, and as the cameras rolled, one undeniable truth spread worldwide. The West had just been confronted, live, unfiltered, with a voice they could no longer silence. The applause still echoed long after Traoré stepped away from the podium. The hall was no longer a place of ceremony. It had transformed into an arena. A battlefield fought not with bullets, but with words that pierced deeper than steel. Cameras scrambled to track him. Journalists tripped over their own questions. But Traoré walked calmly, head unbowed, his stride steady. Like a soldier leaving, a fight he had already won. Obama remained seated, hands folded, concealing the storm behind his measured expression. Macron rose quickly, face tight, speaking in hushed tones to his aides. They had seen speeches before, but never this. Never live, never unfiltered. Within minutes, headlines flared across every major outlet. Traoré shakes global leaders. With bold confrontation, Obama and Macron caught off guard. African president declares, "Never again will we kneel." The clips swept. The internet like wildfire. TikTok edits turned his words into rallying cries. Twitter threads dissected each sentence. On Instagram, African youth remixed his speech with music, treating it like a new anthem. Everywhere, the same question surfaced. Was this the moment Africa's story truly changed? In villages in Burkina Faso, old radios crackled as families crowded to listen to the replay. Farmers in Ghana, traders in Nigeria, students in Kenya, miners in Congo, all sat with widening eyes as they realized they weren't hearing a leader bowing on foreign soil. They were hearing a leader slap the table of history clean apart. But reactions were not all celebrations. In Paris and Brussels, late-night meetings were called. In Washington, memos circulated rapidly. "We need a response," one line read. In private corridors, words like sanctions, destabilization, containment bounced on glossy conference tables. The panic was palpable. Yet outside those polished rooms, the opposite emotion surged. Hope, an intangible but unstoppable energy. Africans, everywhere, repeated his words, as if they'd been waiting for them their entire lives. Africa belongs to Africans? And we will not bow again. It didn't matter what the West thought. The seed had been planted, live, unedited, in front of the whole world. Traoré's speech didn't just bruise ego or disrupt protocol. It did something far scarier to the West. It was inspiring. And that, more than anything, is what they had feared. The cameras in that hall had captured more than a speech. They had captured the shift of narrative, the flip of a script centuries in the making. They had captured the precise moment when Africa no longer whispered behind closed doors. It shouted on the global stage, unshaken, unafraid. The narrator's voice would lean closer here, softer, conspiratorial, as if whispering straight to the audience. They didn't expect it. Not Obama, not Macron, not the carefully built order of comfortable silence. And now, they're scrambling, panicking, rewriting their own scripts. But too late. Because the truth is already out there. And Africa's voice can no longer be muted. A beat of silence. And that speech, that unforgettable moment, it was just the beginning. Another pause. If you want to see what happened next, if you want to understand how far the aftershocks traveled, you already know where to find me.